There is nothing humans like to do more than grouping people together, and one of the most common ways we like to group each other is through generations. And all of these generations have nicknames, so I wanted to go through all of the reasons we got the nicknames for each generation. By the way, most of these nicknames have to do with American history, so keep that in mind. Let's begin with the lost generations from the 1880s to the 1900s. This name was coined by Gertrude Stein and popularized by Ernest Hemingway, a famous writer whose writings once put me to sleep. This name is probably my favorite out of all the generations because it really does suit this generation. This generation went through a lot of trials like World War I without any real rewards. There was a sense of having no purpose, and depression had really taken a grip on society during this time, unless you were rich. Then of course you were having a grand old time. Next is the GI generation, or the greatest generation, from the 1900s to the 1920s, which is a pretty big jump, but considering the circumstances it makes complete sense. The term was popularized by a writer named Tom Brokaw, and this generation grew up during the Great Depression and went on to fight in the Second World War. Considering the defeat of the Nazis and how much Americans turned around during this time, it makes sense this generation wanted to glaze themselves a bit. Next is the silent generation, or the lucky few. This generation was born during World War II and grew up during the Cold War. The silent generation was known to be more traditional and were not as outspoken as the previous generation. They're also called the lucky few because they came up at a time of prosperity compared to the hardships faced by the previous generation. And since soldiers were too busy in wars, there was very few of them. Next is the one I think I've heard the most about, baby boomers, or just boomers for short. The name comes from the massive boom or explosion in the number of children being born during this time, following the end of the Second World War. This large demographic from the 40s to the 60s had a huge impact on politics, economics, and basically everything we consider important today. And honestly, from this point onwards, we don't really get any cool nicknames, but we do have a few more. Next up, we have Generation X, or Gen X, from the 60s to the 80s. This generation was also called the Baby Busters, which is a pretty funny name because there was a decline in births compared to the previous generation. And the X in Gen X is supposed to represent dissent and rebellion from labels, since cynicism around wars like Vietnam, high divorce rates, and a bunch of other things made this entire generation a lot more cynical. Next, we have Millennials, or Gen Y, from the 1980s to the 2000s. This generation came of age during the turn of the century, so that's why they got the name Millennials for the new millennia. This is the other generation except for baby boomers you hear a lot about, and honestly they mark the biggest shift between the old generations and the new generations, since globalization basically changed everything from the 1990s onwards. Next up, we have my generation, aka Gen Z. There's a lot of nicknames for Gen Zs that aren't really used. Some of the ones I found for Generation Z include Gen Z, Zoomers, iGen, Centennials, and so forth. But the best nickname I've seen for my generation has to be the digital natives, since this was the generation that truly grew up on the internet. Then finally we have Gen Alpha, because I guess we ran out of letters. And there's not much to say about this generation yet, except for the fact that their minds might be the most cooked and addicted out of any of the generations to the internet. And that wraps up all of the nicknames for all of the generations. Which one is your favorite? Personally, I think I really like the Lost Generation, or digital natives, for my generation. Let me know in the comments, I guess.